Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Critical Moves. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about what it takes to make the strategy game of the year. Today, I'm joined by Tim.
Hey, everyone.
And Adam again.
Hi, Ron.
So, we kind of joked about this on the previous episode that the three of us were on, and I know it's been referenced a lot in other developer interviews and just general conversations here on this channel, but it's kind of a big enveloping topic for us here at Critical Moves, which is the disillusionment of strategy games in the public view, the potential renaissance of real-time strategy games coming back, even turn-based strategy, or just them coming back in the industry in some significant way. And I'm interested to talk to both of you about this in this little corner that we've carved out for ourselves on Critical Moves with our recent episodes, but I'm really interested in keeping that conversation going. So let's talk about what it takes to make a strategy game that's both good and successful to the public eye.
Interesting question.
So?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's indeed a good question because we struggle a little bit, but I think we have our niche in strategy, and I don't think we need to worry too much about what percentage we have of the market when it comes to games in general. And I think it's the industry is in a healthy place when it comes to strategy games, personally.
I wonder also about the statistics, to be honest, because like right now more and more people are playing video games, and we may feel that strategy games are not so popular nowadays, but if we look at the like pure number of people that are playing them, maybe it's higher than previously. Like right now 10% is still much more people than 15 years ago was like 50% or like 30%. You know what I mean?
Yeah, unfortunately, a big amount of that growth is mobile gaming, which personally I barely see as gaming, but that's just a me thing maybe.
You see, but the scene of strategy games on mobile devices is kind of big. They are pretty simple, pretty casual. But if you look like at the games like Clash of Clans, I would name them strategy games, to be honest.
They are, yeah. I would actually say the best part about that is that the mobile gaming sphere that actually makes up such a significant portion, enough that major companies are trying to buy in and invest there, is pretty significantly made up of strategy games. I think it's just the easiest to adapt to that market and that style of gameplay. I mean, clearly developers are trying to push for first-person shooters or third-person shooters on mobile now, but a lot of it for a very long time has been adapting mobile ports of big strategy franchises or just individual tycoon games on mobile, which is I think it's like an evolution of Flash games, but those were all pretty significantly numbers-based strategy games too.
Actually, that makes me wonder, actually. I just had this thought now, but like if you look at the first board games, if you look at the first computer games, you look at the first mobile games, it seems like when a new platform is being developed like that for games, strategy games are often some of the first games out there, maybe because they require less agility or less complex rules to make. Like we think, okay, chess is like a big board game that came before a lot of the other more complex board games that have less to do with strategy. Same thing with video games. In the 90s, you had like a lot of strategy games, and shooter games required like three-dimensional spacing, required more advanced graphics and so on. So I'm wondering if maybe strategy games is more of a trendsetter in new areas. Like on a mobile game, like it's not so easy to play a shooter game, and it's much easier to play like a turn-based clicking game, right? So maybe it's just natural this way, that strategy paves the way and then the rest follows, and then it makes it seem like strategy is failing afterwards, but it was just the first foot in the door.
You see, so basically, like if we would look from your point of view, that's I believe it's right. I like if you look at strategy games, And games in general, we can see the cycle. Like the genre gets popular, they were getting more and more and more games in this genre, and then there is too much of them. We got fed up, and the next genre takes over. So the first genre that we start playing is strategy games. This is the first one to die, basically. Maybe not die, but it goes in kind of like hiatus that there are games in this genre, but it's not the one that earns GOTY every year. You know what I mean?
So what would it take to win Game of the Year as a strategy game?
Personally, I think a strategy game would have to essentially leave the boundaries of what we would consider traditional strategy games. It would need to probably get rid of more, I'm going to go off on a limb and say unpopular choices in strategy, like turn-based strategy games. I would honestly, just to cut to the chase, I think a strategy game, what I would consider a true strategy game, would have to be something like a tactics game that borders on strategy with a very compelling narrative and a very compelling cast of characters with very high replayability that borders on and steals concepts from things like ARPGs like Diablo and CRPGs like Baldur's Gate. And those are games I wouldn't actually consider strategy games, but they also border on the line. But I think it would basically have to be that. I think that's the closest we would get to a competing game besides something that just went straight esports.
I think there's something that fits the bill of that. When Dota, it's kind of funny, Dota went kind of full loop where they allowed custom map making, and what came out of that is the auto chess. I don't know if you've heard of that, but League of Legends made its own copy with Teamfight Tactics. And it's a tactic game, turn-based, but also kind of not turn-based. Mecha Bellum is another iteration thereof. And it's tactics, and you could say it borders on the strategy, but yeah, it's basically that. And what it is, it's like an easy, quick game that's easy to get into, and it's fast-paced in the terms of like you don't spend half an hour playing one game. You play like 5-10 minutes.
We have these genres that like are being created basically every year. And I would believe that the answer to the question is much simpler. Basically, it would take one game to be really, really good. Like, usually there's this 10 out of 10 game. And basically, when the games goes this way, and the examples for it there are much more of them. Like, for example, Elder Ring or Baldur's Gate. For example, Baldur's Gate won the Game of the Year last year. And I believe that after 2 years, there will be like thousands of games like Baldur's Gate, because it's always like that. And then again, there should, like, if there would happen one big strategy game that it would get like 10 out of 10 in every website, and every reviewer would say it's amazing piece of the product, then basically it would get, the genre would become popular again. It's as simple as it is.
So I guess for me, another question for you guys is like, okay, what would it take for a game, a strategy game, for you guys to be like, oh, this is the best strategy game this year? Like, what are you looking for in a game like that?
I guess for me, if a strategy game was going to supersede my personal expectations and go into something like, this is an objective game for me that reigns supreme for that particular year, it wouldn't have to hit all the specific things I said like before, like a tactics game with borrowing things from other franchises. But I think it would, clearly have to meet my personal expectations, but then also have objective feats over other games. I think a lot of people would probably grant something like that to a Civilization that came out that year because of the amount of polish that those games receive and the amount of content that they might launch with initially, or just that same gameplay loop that people love. I think it would just have to be a well-made game that has a clear plan for content, clear communication from the developers on what they're expecting the gameplay loop to look like, and just in general be filled to the brim with sandbox existing systems, because I think that's the direction they're going to have to go in.
And also the thing that for me would be like the mark of GOTY is quality of life features, because I do believe that most of the current indie developers, when they are creating strategy games, they are usually forgetting about the newest achievements in gaming, like I don't know, some automation, or like some features connected with good interface design that simply we are accustomed to in today's gaming world. But guys, I have one question that's kind of connected to the question Tim you asked, but also it's side stuff. So basically, I do believe that in some different parallel universe, newest Civilization installment could be a GOTY. If it would be 10 out of 10. And like for example, I would say Age of Wonders 4 level in terms of like quality. Like everyone would say in every review, and every reviewer would say it's like the best game they played. I do believe this game could get GOTY, and that's strategy game.
Yeah, true. No, I could see that happening. Yeah. If they had made an actual good game, yeah.
I think something interesting to piggyback off of that is when you think about the previous Game of the Year winners from Jeff Keighley's Game Awards, which is kind of like the generally received Game Awards around this time. When you think about the games that have won, they haven't been what I would have expected, which would have been games that pushed the narrative of their genre and adapted things from other genres and made like a amalgamation of mechanics. They're actually just pretty simply the most polished ultimate versions of the game in each genre. I mean, when I think about Astrobot winning last year in December, it was considered by most to be the most polished, well-crafted platformer in years. And if you think about before that, Baldur's Gate 3, it only exceeded to that point because they took the CRPG format and they didn't revolutionize it. They just packed it with as much production value as possible. And before that, I mean, Red Dead Redemption 2 would have easily been the best Western game you could have played. God of War, the best linear narrative game you could have played that year. I mean, they're not stealing or borrowing anything from other genres. They're not doing all this stuff that I'm saying a strategy game should do. As an actual counter to my point, the objective fact is that all of these are just the best version of that. So I think that supports what you're saying, Adam. I think there's a universe in which Civilization 8 could be Game of the Year if it was just the most polished strategy game ever made.
But would that also count? Let's say we do a Game of the Year award here on Critical Moves, which is something that I suggested to Al before actually, and I think we should do it at the end of the year at some point. But let's say we do that, like, what kind of game would you vote for? What would you look for in a game if you would vote for? Because yeah, I mean, these game awards, and I kind of see why these game awards do that, because those games are actually they're extremely good games, enjoyed by so many people, because people, I guess, they enjoy the polish more than they enjoy the newness of some cool hip new little thing. And the polish is extremely enjoyable, I would say, from all of these games. Would you vote also for a polished game, or would you vote for something that pushes the boundaries?
I totally agree with Jack on this topic. The game simply needs to be polished to this kind of level that people outside of the genre, and that's also the case for all the GOTYs in previous years, that basically game got such huge popularity that people outside of the topic started to play it, like Baldur's Gate 3, like Astrobot. I had friends who were like, Adam, I heard about this game Astrobot, is it good? So again, if Civilization, the newest Civilization game, would be so good and so polished that everyone in here, like Al would even say it's good, Nuno would say it's good. So like at this point,
wow.
I do believe there will be some people that would say, okay, Adam, you heard about the Civilization game? Maybe I should play it. And this is the point that the games become GOTY, in my opinion. This is exactly the point.
So the most polished game from Game of the Year is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, since it's made by CD Projekt Red. The most polished.
Okay. Nah,
Just a joke for you, Adam.
I was getting ready to argue.
yes, it's most polished game ever.
But yeah, no, I see what you mean. I guess when I'm looking at a game to play and I'm excited about, I think something new and fresh does pull me in greatly, and I want to appreciate that. And I see so many copies and repetition, and strategy games especially, that I when a new game is released, it's the first thing I look at is like, how much is this a carbon copy of a previous game I've already played? And if it's a bit too much, I lose interest very quickly.
But isn't the like quality of being polished like at some point also novelty? Like Baldur's Gate 3 didn't do much.
Yeah.
It simply was so good that everyone was so surprised it is so good. That was the case.
Well, unless you played Divinity Original Sin, which wasn't as huge as Baldur's Gate 3, but like almost all of the elements of Baldur's Gate 3 were already in Divinity Original Sin 2. So I think Baldur's Gate 3 wasn't as huge of a wow game for me because of that. And like, okay, amazing game. I played it like hundreds and hundreds of hours, but I find the innovation personally more rewarding.
I think an interesting perspective on this is to consider that a game of the year probably doesn't... I think when a game of the year comes out, it's ultimately decided by whether or not you have many questions after, right? So if a strategy game came out next year and we considered it game of the year over everything else, we wouldn't be sitting there asking, where is the production value? Where is the content plan afterwards? Where's the multiplayer or the functionality with this? Where is the clearly lacking or cut systems for specific dynamics or areas of improvement for the game? In some instances of Civilization, games come out and they ask, where's religion? Where's spirituality for culture? They ask, where's the functionality or where are these specific kingdoms that were, or like civilizations that were in previous games? So that's kind of an issue, right?
Yeah.
Is you can call it polish, you can call it production value, but if a strategy game came out next year and everybody on Critical Moves is going to have a unanimous game of the year, we'd probably be sitting there saying, well, this game, every time we try to find an issue with it, we've just found a checked box. And maybe it doesn't make everybody happy. Maybe it doesn't include multiplayer. And some of us are left out to dry. But it probably has such a coherent single-player narrative or replayability factor or sandbox elements that exist that we're like, that works. I mean, we talk about some games all the time. But I'm sure when Stellaris came out, the conversation was about how significant that was for strategy gaming, because it's a game that we're still talking about, probably going on a decade now. I don't remember exactly when it released, maybe 2016 or 17.
Thereabout.
Maybe earlier than that. But still, I mean, that's a game that's still receiving content updates, and there were questions at the start. But if the game had released as is with no content afterwards, maybe it wouldn't be talked about as much, but we'd still be like, that was a pretty damn good sci-fi space sandbox game.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I guess personally, there's other games that I prefer over Stellaris that are in the same genre, and I think like, oh, these did way more interesting things than Stellaris, but they're much smaller games, and they didn't receive these updates, and they didn't receive this love that Stellaris has, because they didn't have the budget in part. So I see what you're saying with that.
But guys, you don't earn GOTY after a year. You earn GOTY at the point of the release of the game. So, like, unfortunately, when it comes to Paradox games, usually it occurs the games is great after a year or two. Like, Age of Wonders was good, but I do believe that with every update, it's becoming better and better games, and people are considering it much higher quality product. And the GOTY is this is the point of time that the games comes out and everyone knows something is going on. And unfortunately, with live service / DLC based games, that's not the case.
Doesn't have the momentum.
I think this steers us really well back into the primary point of discussion for this, which is if you take out the specific Game of the Year concept for strategy games, we're back in the original point, which is just for us, when we talk about strategy gaming as a niche, isn't it inherently a niche because of less eyes on the industry? Something is a niche because it's less popular or a specific taste, but strategy games were so significant during a period of PC gaming when CRPGs and early RPGs existed, but first-person shooters did not, and obviously new genres that pop up every year now didn't. So I think this exists as a conversation because people like Al on Critical Moves acknowledge that he can ask a question to developers like, do you believe there is a strategy gaming renaissance right now? And the fact that the answer can be no is interesting to us here at Critical Moves because we're considering that for there to have been a renaissance, we have to acknowledge first that strategy gaming is at either a lower point or outside of the public view. And so I guess to steer us right back where we were, I think there's a few pretty specific points for why strategy gaming doesn't compete very well in the larger industry right now. And that's not getting into all of the stuff that's kind of a counterpoint to what we're saying about the state of the industry right now, how it's actually not doing so well in some cases. And if we stay pretty specific to strategy games, I'll go through a few points with you guys that I have down, and then you guys can give me your general thoughts about that.
Yeah, sure. I guess I have some thoughts about what you just said, but I'll let you go with that first.
I just think in general, this is going to be more personal to me, specifically my opinions on this, and I'd love to hear both of you if you have counterpoints afterwards or points that you have considered after I've said what I said, but please let me know what you think about these general statements for why strategy gaming probably isn't in the popular view right now. So first up on my list, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about this, is strategy games have a poor pricing model for today's standards. We were just talking about how games need to be good or game of the year at launch. And I think the issue with strategy games is that it takes years for them to receive the content that they deserve to be a fleshed out game. But not only that, but all strategy games that I can consider are doing that. Well, not all, but most of them are receiving that content through a paid DLC model, which is uncommon today, except for MMOs.
I kinda agree with it, because on the other hand, as we said previously, if the newest Civilization would be a good game, then your argument is not valid. I guess it may be an issue if we talk about games like Stellaris, but when it comes to, let's call it Europa Universalis, newest installment, and can be a GOTY because we got, I don't know, 5th installment. It's so polished and it got to such a pinnacle of game development that at the face of releasing this game, it may be already good. It won't be a case for a new installment like Stellaris on like new, completely different series. But for the one that is established in the industry, like for example, the case was also for Baldur's Gate 3. It is also a series, and of course, I would say it's more of the Divinity Original Sin series right now than the Baldur's Gate series. But still, this is the best entry to it, and it became GOTY. So back to your argument, maybe not the first installment, but we have so many series that right now on the market that one of them can become GOTY at some point.
So I guess I don't see it that way. I think Baldur's Gate 3 was also really unique in that it brought a huge amount of people to play an RPG or a turn-based RPG, people that would never play that sort of game. And I heard a lot of personal stories and read a lot of stories of people who would never play video games and then they play Baldur's Gate or something like that. And I think that with strategy games, it's a little bit different, maybe. I think there is simply a type of personality, type of person that enjoys certain things. And I think that when it comes to strategy games, there's a large part of the general population that just doesn't have the kind of character that they would enjoy that sort of thing. It just doesn't interest them. They have other preferences when it comes to their pastime, and thinking strategically is just not one of them. And I think that's perfectly okay, and I don't think that's something that needs to be pushed. And I think it makes a lot of sense, even from a evolutionary point of view. So I would say that it's okay, and it doesn't have to be different. Of course, you can attract a larger portion. I mean, some people like and strategy game and shooters, for example. And then if you have a really good strategy game, you can pull more people towards the strategy game. But still, there will always be a limit. And if you think about, okay, well, in the 90s, there was like a lot of people playing strategy games. Yeah, but there was less gamers. And like, if you were a gamer in the 90s, it was kind of a weird thing. Like, you were a bit of a weirdo for doing that. And so nowadays, gaming is like much more normalized. And you have like people who would be categorized as jocks, maybe playing video games, and it's much more normalized.
Right. And I'm curious if either of your opinions change if you remove the GOTY part of the conversation, which I know is in conflict with the episode title, but it's if you consider what makes an objectively good strategy game, subjectively for you, we'll say, it's like taking away the possibility of winning Game of the Year.
Well, that's a big thing. Subjectively is like a really big asterisk there, because my personal opinion will differ greatly about what I think is good for the general public, I would say.
Well, sure, but I would consider, if I had to make a subjective choice like you asked me of what was the best strategy game of that year, not just my favorite, but what I thought was the best one of the first things I would jump to was, because I like live service games so much, which is a personal thing for me, if my opinion weighed on that, I would be wondering whether or not the game released in a finished state, Civilization 7, or if the content model afterwards was going to support the game. And the issue is that most strategy games, like we're talking about, deliver that content in DLC. I mean, every Paradox game is, you just wait a few years to hop on the train and, you're taking out a mortgage to play those games. And so, in our personal opinion, would it still be a good strategy game knowing that you have years and years of quarter, every 4 months buying a DLC for that game?
I have a really bold statement. If the game would be good enough, it wouldn't matter if every 4 months there would be DLC. To some extent, but again, I do believe that it would be good enough. It would become GOTY at this point. So, guys, imagine that Warcraft 4 is released, like in 1 year time. Basically everyone would talk about it, and then if it would be 10 out of 10, it would become GOTY. And it's, again, as simple as it is. And of course, maybe it wouldn't be as popular as Baldur's Gate 3, because the genre is hard to, to basically interact with. But becoming a GOTY sometimes is simply connected with like point popularity on a timescale of game releases.
Yeah, and I would say that maybe if I would look to vote, I wouldn't look so much at the price, which is also, I mean, I think pricing is important, and I don't want to encourage companies to be greedy here. I really don't. But yeah, if I'm looking at best game of the year, I would be blind to the cost of that personally. But then I would maybe separate from that, I would say, well, they're fucking stupid for being so greedy. But if it's purely about what's the best game, I would not look at the price at all.
Yeah, and I'll clarify that I'm not asking that to say that, in my personal opinion, if I had to choose, I would neglect the games that were expected to have DLC or released with an idea that might be the content plan. I think for me, it really is just whether or not the game is finished and polished, like we said, and the DLC wouldn't matter because the game would be good enough. There's games that are not strategy games that I can buy into for a decade of content if I really just enjoyed playing it that much. But it's interesting considering how to get so many more people onto strategy games that previously weren't playing them, how to revitalize this section of the industry, how to get new players. But I'll go ahead and jump to my second point because I think that's really important for this too. So the second statement is strategy games are very difficult to make content for as a community.
What do you mean?
So we were just talking about the health of the industry, and I think it's important to clarify that the industry boomed during the pandemic when everybody was at home and could purchase games and didn't have as many options for entertainment. And there was lots of money being invested into the gaming industry, which is the big conversation that a lot of influencers are talking about right now. But to breeze past that, since there's other podcasts you can listen to for that information, these days, Game of the Year is determined not just by the quality of the game, but also by popularity as well. And it's an unfortunate part of the conversation, but it's an objective aspect here that game numbers and sales are inflated through general word of mouth and streaming and video content. And I just think, to wrap this up, that strategy games are incredibly difficult to capture in that way because most people will either watch a game for one of a few reasons, because it's generally that entertaining with the influencer that's playing it, generally sandbox games. It has a captivating story, which most strategy games are not necessarily built for these days, or because it has some kind of inherent gameplay loop that draws people to it. So in a lot of cases, that would be your Dota or your Smite, things like that are kind of real-time strategy lane-based game esports in that way. But otherwise, there's not a whole lot of reason to watch a streamer play these games or that particular streamer play that same game over and over and over again. So
your age is showing a little bit there, Jack. You might be too young to remember, but the big Kickstarter of esports was StarCraft Brood War, which was a huge thing, and it was the biggest esports for a very, very long time. Very much a strategy game, although I will admit that it leans a bit towards the tactics side. Another thing that I think is great that used to be a thing and it's not so big anymore was the custom-made maps that a lot of these strategy games had, like Warcraft 3, Age of Empires 2. They had very easy tools to make your own game within the game. And people made tons and tons of loads of different games, and it was very interactive. It was very community based, and I don't see that as much anymore. And there's probably reasons for that. And I mean, these grand strategy games that are nowadays popular don't really have that appeal. That they have more the sandbox appeal, which you brought up. And I do see streamers being involved to that sandbox aspect of the grand strategy games. But yeah.
So when we look at the community side of the game, again, we have two sides. And one of them, in my opinion, is crucial to GOTY, and one of them is simply it doesn't matter. Unfortunately, I do believe that map creation doesn't matter for a GOTY award, but I do believe that like streaming and doing challenges in like that release window is one of the most important thing that basically affects if the game is GOTY or not. So because the maps are really good for a game, for example, to reach, I don't know, like live service, being live, or maybe live service is not that case, but like being played every now and then by people to still keep the player count. But the streaming and being popular in, like, I don't know, for Baldur's Gate, that was the sex scene with a bear. That was the thing that basically created the community side of this game. So again, it would help basically, because for example, on the other side, there's Astrobot, which wasn't so popular in streaming. But again, let's say most of the game needs to be popular with streaming community. And yeah, I do believe that the strategy game that would be GOTY should be played by streamers, either in multiplayer or in campaign that maybe it has some interesting features that streamers would like to show.
I guess what Jack was saying was about what would attract players to the strategy game genre, and I do think that some community oriented aspect can help a lot, where people are empowered to create something. And then I'm thinking of something like Factorio or something like some. I think that kind of game can have the possibility of having that. It just needs like another element to have more feedback between individuals, and not just like some mods, or not just something like that, but some really interactivity between players, but in the Factorio side perhaps.
Yeah, I'd quickly plug that I think one of the games that's been most successful of that for quite a while now has been Dwarf Fortress, which is a simulation game. I would consider that a strategy game inherently, because it's simulation in my opinion. But that game has tons of viral videos on just the content that can come out of that game and its antics.
Imagine if you could create a game within Dwarf Fortress or within Factorio and then interact with other players within that game. I think that's really powerful.
I think there has to be a level of multiplayer implementation to reach audiences like that now.
Or it's an amazing single player experience with story and development and characters and all of that. Yeah.
Which brings me exactly to my third point, which is I think that strategy games today have a difficult time competing narratively with other games for Game of the Year.
There was a time when this wasn't an issue, and for me the pinnacle of it was Warcraft 3. Like I remember
absolutely.
me going through the story campaign like several times, and campaign until this day is such a good experience. I cannot comprehend why there wasn't a single one more strategy title that even like touches the level that's campaign of Warcraft 3. I don't know what happened there, but it was something else. The cinematics were amazing, the missions were amazing, the plot was so good, and I believe that it's still achievable by a new strategy game. But the issue, we got also in this kind of like cycle that because strategy games are not so popular, the big companies are not pouring so much budget into the games. If we are not pouring so much budget into the games, we cannot create such a good story. You know, the cinematics, the voiceover that was on the par of Warcraft 3. If we don't create such a level of plot, then it's really hard to base the new go-to strategy game on the story. So unfortunately, it's achievable, but not realistic, in my opinion.
I think a lot of us remember when Arthas walks into the throne room and the king asks him, what are you doing, my son? Yeah. And he says, I'm succeeding you, father. And big moments like that. No, true. And it's actually what you're saying there is exactly what I said in some of the one of the first episodes of Critical Moves. And I agree with that. And I think you can very heavily focus on that single player story driven campaign, and it can be done really well. I just think a big issue also is that players who are really nerdy about making a strategy game, they focus very heavily on the Excel spreadsheet part or on the mechanics or something like that. And then people who are really passionate about storytelling and artwork, that they will be more drawn to create like an RPG game or something like that. And so there's like a natural selection somewhere. And I think that could be at the core of that issue. But I definitely would love to play a very story-driven strategy campaign.
What we are missing right now in today's gaming is that basically there are no strategy games with good campaign, because the storytelling of a good campaign in strategy games is something else. You cannot recreate it in Call of Duty. You cannot create the atmosphere of the whole world collapsing that was in there in FPS.
No, and indeed, and I can maybe give you some insider insights at Beyond All Reason. What I noticed there is that it's a volunteer project where people who have a passion for the game can get involved and contribute, and then tons of people do interact with it and are like, oh, it would be cool if we add this, and it would be cool if we add that, and so on. But almost all of those are people who are interested in the strategy aspect, and there's some people who are like, oh yeah, we could do a story based on this, and they're maybe interested a little bit in storytelling, but like the disproportionate level of people who are interested in like, oh, let's balance these units, or let's add some cool new big robot or something like that, versus people who are like, oh, let's create this really cool worlds, and I'm gonna invest a lot of time in that. That difference is huge, and I think that's where a lot of the differences lie as well.
I agree. I think it would actually be kind of funny to imagine that the most compelling, genuine, well-produced narrative of World War II captured in a video game might be a turn-based strategy game that none of us have played. It's just because it's so unapproachable sometimes to both. It's just really hard to both market your strategy game narratively and that entice players, because so many of us are invested in the individual mechanics and the type of strategy game that they're adapting. And similarly, it's really hard to gauge as a player or a consumer what those games are like, because there are plenty of times I see strategy games that look like they have a compelling story because they're selling it, but it actually takes a backseat to the sandbox gameplay or the real-time strategy gameplay of individual missions, or it's a strategy game that's marketing itself as a strategy game, and you'll never know it has a compelling story. So I think it's kind of an issue on the side of trying to market those games effectively. And I think unless you have this isn't always the case, but a tactics game where you get to embody your individual teammates in a squad probably personalizes them for you more than a first-person shooter could through its narrative. And you can probably tell an even more compelling narrative by having you interact with systems and have pop-ups and have characters voiceover interactions in a strategy game, and have more of a narrative delivered by the end of 8 to 10 hours than a first-person shooter where your gameplay loop has to be very focused first-person shooter.
Yeah, just if you don't mind, just one thing is that, okay, listen already how you're selling this. You're first having your tactics game, and then you're adding some text boxes to it. And I think that's the core of the issue. I think most of us have already had thoughts of like, oh, I would really like to make a strategy game, and you already have like some idea in your head, but like, what? You're always starting with like, oh, these strategic elements would be really cool, and then much later comes the story elements. And it's very rarely, oh, it'd be really cool if you had this story and these characters, and I guess we're going to attach a strategy game to that.
Yeah, so we are getting basically to the start of the discussion, because we talked that it's really hard for the strategy game to be a complete package at the start. And that's exactly the case, because the complete package of a game that would be considered GOTY is a multiplayer, single player with good campaign. So then we have a huge part of a game that should be there. And I don't know, maybe some different new mechanics that are polished to the really good level. At this point, we have a game with huge budget. That's simply not possible. It's simply not possible nowadays for a strategy game. Unfortunately, it's a bummer, to be honest. If we would take, I don't know, if we start and let's go with single player campaign only. Okay, the game would be popular, but for a strategy game not having a multiplayer, I do believe that in every review and in every movie and every YouTube video, people would talk like, okay, I wish this game would have multiplayer. And then this game again wouldn't be a 10 out of 10. So like expectations for strategy games are so high because the genre is so old that we cannot reach the expectation at this point. So last game of the years were Astrobot. This is a platformer. Baldur's Gate. This is a CRPG. Then Elder Ring, I do believe. So this is Souls-like. But again, these games are... If we look from afar at these games, I do believe the strategy games And Warcraft 3, for example, as one of the best games of all times.
I would say that there's a few games that buck that trend and that are quite different, and there are single player campaigns. Something that I can think of is, for example, Suzerain. I mentioned that before. It's like a talking simulator, but you're like the president of a country and you talk to people and you strategize like elections and so on. And it's a 100% story driven because all you do is talk with other people. It is strategic, and it completely changes how you can perceive what a game is, even, which I find absolutely great. Of course, it's not going to win Game of the Year, but it's just to show that like very different experiences are absolutely possible. Something else that I can think of is something like High Fleet. Super engaging story, incredibly immersive, not hugely strategic. It's more of an action game, but just to show you that campaigns like that are definitely, I think, possible. And then it's its own thing. The campaign is its own game, and it's okay for it not to be multiplayer. So I definitely think it is possible. It just needs to be a little bit more out of the box, and it needs to be moved away from, oh, let's recreate Age of Empires or let's recreate Red Alert.
We have Total War series. It's really good. Every entry of this series is considered at least 8 out of 10. So why there isn't a single GOTY in this series? Basically, we get a new release every year. So why isn't a single one of them a GOTY?
It's too complex. I mean, even though personally I find it a little bit on the not complex enough side, but like I think for too many people, you have to sink in too many hours to even start playing the game. Like, let's imagine someone who's never played a video game. You put them in front of a computer with Total War. They're like, the fuck is this? What are you doing to me? Like, am I supposed to understand what's going on? It's nightmare for these people to play a game like that, and it's too niche. It's too complex.
Personally, I think it opens up a really big conversation in itself of the whole story of how we got from massively popular for its time and its presence strategy games in the 80s and 90s, and the way they were overtaken by other genres that we have today and the reason why they were dethroned. And we could get into that whole narrative, but that's like an episode on its own. But I think it was an issue where for so long games like Total War, when they were not only popular or what some may consider at their peak, or inventing new things for strategy games in some way, shape, or form, at least by being consistent 8 out of 10s, were happening at a time where so many of these other genres were still competing with strategy games technologically. There's a reason why we went from massively popular for its time strategy games to CRPGs, to action RPGs, to just RPGs and first-person shooters instead of, squad-based tactics games back then. And I just think that those games were winning Game of the Year over Total War at the time because they were inventing the wheel over and over again in completely new genres. So it was maybe a popularity thing, but at the same time, I think they were probably evolving far more than Total War was within the strategy sphere. So before I hop on to my last point, number 4, I want to ask, because I've been thinking about this maybe for like a day or two, but it's really hitting me right now. This doesn't necessarily solve everything, but I think a pretty good contender for something like a strategy game of the year, and if you take away Game of the Year, a very popular strategy game that could bring people into this part of our industry would be, are you both familiar with Helldivers 2?
Familiar.
Well, for any of our viewers that are uninitiated to the industry at large outside of strategy games, Helldivers 2 is this massively popular third-person shooter game that is so successful for reinventing the wheel of live service games because they have a galaxy of planets that you do missions on with different biomes and different enemy types. There is a clear-cut, community-driven war map where you can see the statistics of each front of the war against different species that you're fighting. Community engagement as far as playing the missions contributes to those overall statistics, and it actually evolves the live community-driven narrative of the game. So rather than having a pre-built narrative by the developers, they've gone ahead and created content updates and created story beats and created the characters and the sandbox settings for the game but it requires the players to push the narrative and evolve it by capturing planets or losing planets to the war, or planets being blown up, or even the capital planet being under attack right now as of this episode recording. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because part of the story of success for Helldivers 2 is that Helldivers 1 was a not so popular twin stick shooter, which is vastly different in its gameplay. I just wanted to ask both of you, how awesome would it have been if Helldivers evolved differently, where maybe even for Helldivers 2 it evolved backwards, and we had gotten a real-time strategy game in that series? So essentially, players would take on narrative missions every day in different biomes with one of the 3 different alien races that they can fight. And in doing so, they are doing a real-time strategy mission that can be completable with resource management, individual troop management, massive fleets in space, troops on the ground, things like that. And by beating a mission every day, not only are you completing challenges to unlock things for your characters at large, or your squad, or your troops, or skins, but you're also contributing to an overall community narrative that way.
Yeah, it sounds a bit like what Tatsu was selling us last week with Zero Space, isn't it?
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah, I mean, a very social element to it can be really powerful. Even if you play it by yourself, you know, if you have like your stats and like it's the whole engagement process and everything like that, and your friends are playing and they did this on that mission or they advanced that. I think that's really powerful in today's world. Yeah.
I mean, I also think it solves an issue with the gameplay loop. I mean, there's so many strategy games that we can play over and over and over again, even narrative-based ones that will still load up and play missions over and over again because the gameplay loop is so fun. But imagine solving the issue, I feel, as to why people can't make content, which is you have these sandbox elements and these changing strategy game missions. And so not only is it different and you're still receiving that content for free in the future, but you're also still getting that same very fun gameplay loop as a strategy gamer. So I feel like it solves kind of the conversation we're talking about to some degree, where to a point, some games are going to have their base mechanics without any DLCs added on, and eventually playing Age of Empires 2 will get boring on that deserted island that we're stuck on.
Well, I definitely think the multiplayer aspects gives a lot of the replayability of strategy. I mean, chess is still being played, right? But yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I wouldn't have been incredibly surprised if Helldivers 2 would have gotten a Game of the Year award, to be honest, though.
Me too, but again, that's the case. Yeah, the issue is that this was, I do believe, one of the best game of that year, but still, it didn't win.
There's so many games out there. I mean, if that one didn't win, I'm not gonna blame it for that.
I'll hop into my last point here, which is, I guess I was kind of avoiding it because it's the one I believe the least. But I have this personal opinion that strategy games just take too long to make. It's something I'm kind of astounded by, because I don't have all the insider industry knowledge. I don't have the depth of understanding of how games are developed. But being a consumer and being a follower of the industry news for almost all of my life, I can see the development cycles of so many titles in different genres. And for some reason in particular, strategy games, even sequential titles in a franchise, can take upwards of 3 to 5 years to produce the next in a like line for those games. And some of those titles in those franchises, outside of changing the setting, aren't changing many of the core foundational mechanics. Maybe they add 1 or 2 new systems. And that surprises me, because there's corporations that are releasing sports game franchises yearly, and I don't think that strategy games need to do that for my sake, but I'm just surprised they haven't taken that approach.
I'm not sure about that, because I think it also depends on what kind of strategy game you're looking at. But I mean, you can make a 2-dimensional turn-based strategy game, and you don't need that many assets. You don't need that complex of an engine. I think you can make that in a relatively short period of time if you have a really good idea, like Balantro. And I don't know. I don't really agree with that, I guess. And I think that a 3-dimensional first-person shooter, for example, requires like so much textures and 3D modeling and everything like that. The very basic strategy game, I think, is incredibly easy and quick to make, and you can make something really complex and fun with that as well.
You don't think that this is a shopping list of features for a game of the year more than it is something like, you know, if a strategy game could not compete with multiplayer community aspects, it might as well try to leverage itself with the most compelling narrative possible to get that game of the year spot. But I think to pivot back, kind of talking about the length of development, it's interesting because we bring up these two big powerhouses. Paradox release a game, and then they add on to that game with features over time and release these payment models of DLC to acquire new features. And I still get blown away when they come out with the expansion pack that actually adds new features to their strategy games, because I never thought that they could actually do that within the engine. And it surprises me, even though it's nowhere near the scale of some updates that other games in the Game of the Year category are getting. My point is, we have two real-world examples of their failure here. For Paradox, there's games like City Skylines 2, which we've talked about here at Critical Moves, where they attempted to create a sequel for a game without all of the features that they cumulatively added over time. In Civilization's case, they only released 2 or 3 DLCs, if that, over their entire life cycle, I believe. And it takes them so long between Civilization titles that it becomes even more glaringly flawed when they release a title that's either unfinished or lacking features that were previously in another title. Because if I remember correctly, Civilization 6 was the Civilization that released without spirituality or religion mechanics that had to be added in a DLC after, like, post-launch. But I know there's a subset of players that prefer more complex mechanics that exist, or the way the game runs in Civilization 5 compared to Civilization 6, or the art style changes. And as a consumer, everything they mentioned about Civilization 7 didn't interest me as far as major changes to the gameplay loop. So it becomes an issue where I now have to wait till Civilization 8 to see if they pivot back based on my complaints, but that's years away. So are we all in kind of a general agreement that these games do take a little too long to make with the development cycle, or what they're adding in versus what they have to attempt to do to even make a sequel?
That's true. I have a similar idea when I think of like Terra Invicta, for example. I mentioned it before, and I really, really like the game. And the game is like so fresh and it introduces all these new mechanics that I've never seen in a game like that before. And I love it for it, and I think it's great. And then I'm thinking like it's not even released yet. It's not at 1.0 yet. And I already tried to replay it. I'm like, yeah, but they need to improve some things. There's some mechanics. I'm like, I already see where the flaws are, and I want them to iterate on that and create a new game of that. And the game is not even released yet. So if I'm thinking, when am I going to play Terra Invicta 2? That's going to be like many years from now, and I'm a bit saddened by that, to be honest.
That's an issue with early access release, and it's really visible in terms of strategy games. Because when you have, like, for example, I don't know, there's game No Rest for a Wicked, and it's kind of action game. So if you release like one map at a time, people play one map, they say, okay, it's a good map, bad map, it doesn't matter. But in terms of strategy games, when Terra Invicta releases a new update, basically they start to tweak the update, and the game is not even released. This is the interesting part. You see, like, it prolongs the development of the game, because people are complaining about the game right now. It's still not yet released, and you are spending time on tweaking them instead of making the whole package and then tweaking it as it is.
And that's why the Paradox approach of the DLC kind of makes a lot of sense, because they release the game and then they actually listen to the players, and the players are enjoying the game, and then they listen like, oh, people don't like that, or they really like this, and then they adjust the game and they build on top of that. And so that approach makes a lot of sense for me, especially with very complex games like that, where people are gonna find loopholes. People are gonna imagine you create Europa Universalis 5 or whatever, and you playtest it. Like, how much playtesting does it take to find all the bugs for one, but also like to find what is fun or not fun? Like, just one campaign, it takes you so long. So basically, let the players playtest, and you can adjust the game on the go. And I think it's a formula that works really well for really complex games.
I agree, and I think that altogether we've kind of compiled a pretty significant list of our personal opinions and some kind of industry objective truths about what it takes to make a strategy game that brings people back to this part of the industry. We're getting towards the end, but I still did want to ask both of you, did either of you come up with any additional points on top of the things that I spent some time coming up with for why these games have fallen out of the public sector or what it would take to make them win?
I would say that I'll repeat what I said earlier, and I just think it's not in the interest of a very large portion of the population to play strategy games in general. If you take a whole bunch of random people and like, hey, let's play a board game together or whatever, and you put a whole bunch of different board games, like the fun casual party games is what are often going to come out on top, and not the huge box with like the super complex rules and stuff like that. And I think that's okay, and we need to accept our niche, I think.
Right. And I kind of mentioned it earlier, where I think if you're going to bring those players in, you'd probably have to encroach on the genres that already exist prevalently within that public sphere. I think indie is the way. I don't think that indie games are necessarily going to win Game of the Year, but I think if there was an indie title that merged something like Frostpunk with more roguelite elements, where you had more randomization that isn't just weather. You know, if you had roguelites that gave you cards about, like it was a card game and a roguelite where it was telling you on the cards what buildings you could place down. I know those games exist. They're just not necessarily receiving the funding or the attention that they deserve. But that's just my opinion. Well, thank you both for joining me today on this conversation. I think it's something our viewers have kind of expected, as we've kind of beat around the bush on talking about the strategy game renaissance, what it takes to make a game, whether or not strategy games even exist in the public sphere. I think we've kind of all touched on those topics with our developer interviews and our general conversations about what we've been playing, things like that. So thank you both for tuning in. If people wanted to see more of Critical Moves or get involved, they could go to the Discord, and they could also go to criticalmovespodcast.com, where you can find information about the team, information about the show, and a bunch of hyperlinks on how to find us and where to watch our episodes. So thank you so much to everybody that's watching.
Thanks for having us.
See you next time.
Thank you, guys.